So hi everyone. I'm Thomas, and you met Nathan just before, and so we've been working with the Auckland War Memorial Museum late last year on sort of the recovery, the excavation, and the study of the fossils that were found during the Central Interceptor projects up here in Auckland. And so the project's been a collaboration between Auckland Museum and Watercare, who are running the project basically. Of the Central Interceptor project, I should say. So I'll dive straight into that. Hang on. There we go. So we've already had an introduction, but do a quick little overview again. So I finished my MSc in 2020. I've been studying paleoecology of Miocene fossil deposits. So I did Matheson's Bay and a site down at Port Waikato for my honours and masters. And I'm currently working at Auckland Museum as a paleontology technician. I've just finished going through our backlog of paleontology collections just this week. And so most of that is old Finlay and Laws and Powell collections that have been sitting around for a long, long time, which are now digital. They're up in our digital collection systems and slowly getting imaged so they can go up online for everybody to see. And aside from that, I'm also a research assistant with the Devora project, who are studying the volcanic risk of Auckland. And I'm an aspiring PhD. I sometime soon, once I've whittled down some of my responsibilities, I want to dive into another paleontology or paleoecology project based on probably invertebrate paleontology, but we'll see. Take it away, Nathan.
Oh, yeah. So just following on from my introduction from Daniel, I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Auckland studying travertines and speleothems around Mount Taranaki and looking at what they can tell us about the volcanic history of Mount Taranaki. For my master's, I studied a basaltic volcano in Vanuatu. I did do an honors project in paleobotany. I did a paleo-environmental reconstruction of the largest fossil forest in Auckland, which occurs around the Te Atatū Peninsula, and I did that using fossil pollen and fossil wood. So I kind of gone down the igneous geochemistry path, but I still have a very keen interest in paleontology, and that's manifested itself in this project, but also as a collections volunteer at Auckland Museum. I've been doing that since 2018. So that involves identifying and rehousing a lot of the marine and geology collections at Auckland Museum. I am the outreach coordinator for the Devora project, so I work with Thomas on that project. And I also tutored a stage 1 earth science course at Auckland University. Cool, next slide.
Oh, and before we dive into the talk, I just wanted to acknowledge the big list of people that have had a role to play this far in the project, getting it to where it is. So our employers, Tamaki Panga here at Auckland War Memorial Museum, and our funders, Watercare Services Limited, are the two that really made this happen. And we've got to thank you both for this amazing collaboration, which you all too often don't really see in this current world. You know, we've got a lot of projects that have a lot of geological discoveries that don't sort of see their full potential because they get covered up or destroyed. But we've got collaboration here between the Institute and Watercare, and that's just been an amazing experience to be part of. So thank them. I want to thank Bruce Hayward and Ellen Bew, who have mentored us and helped us with the paleontology throughout the project, and co-authoring the description paper that will hopefully come out of this eventually. Wilma and Rebecca at Auckland Museum, who have been project managing us from the museum side of things. You guys have been amazing, and we thank you so much for your help and support with everything you guys have been doing. Bernice and Ron from Watercare have been amazing from the other side. So they've been making sure we've got everything we need from Watercare and supporting us on a day-to-day basis, sometimes showing up on site just to see how we're doing. So we really appreciate that, guys. Waiapa Bulk Haulage, they're the ones who managed the site that the fossil material was laid out on. So they allowed us access, and they were kind enough to give us heavy machinery for part of the process, which I'll get into a bit later. want to give a shout out to Gala Abigaldi and Mana Whenua as well for their involvement, along with Fred Brook, Eric Scott, Seaborn Rust, and Dennis Gordon, who have been helping with the IDs of some of the microfossils, and Fred, who describes a couple of species. And just to everybody who's been out to site with us, kept us company, and found the amazing fossils that we're here to talk about today. And last little thing, quick plug for Bruce and Fred. Their paper on the Pliocene flax snails that we found at Mängere is released this week. And so you can go see that on New Zealand Journal of Geology and Geophysics, which all of you should be able to access as Geoscience Society members of New Zealand. So we've broken the talk to 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be sort of the overview of the projects, our experiences on site, how everything came about, who was involved, how we collected everything. And so Nathan's going to lead that part. So I'll let you take that one away.
All right. So all the fossils that we found in this project came from the Central Interceptor project, which is this approximately 15-kilometre long tunnel that runs from Greylin in central Auckland all the way down to the Mängere wastewater treatment plant. And its genesis really came about because during high rainfall events, stormwater and sewage runoff just enters into the Waitemata harbour and the Manukau harbour. And so we really needed a dedicated set of purpose-built tunnels that would take away this rainwater, this wastewater overflow, and take it to the Mängere wastewater treatment plant. It is the largest subsurface wastewater infrastructure project ever undertaken in New Zealand, and it is it's being delivered by Gala Albergaldi joint venture. Gala is a Italian tunnelling company, and Albergaldi is an Australian civil engineering company. And they're doing that in conjunction with Watercare services. Next slide. And in order to build this tunnel, the tunnel is being built by a tunnel boring machine. And so in order to lower that tunnel boring machine to about 40 kilometers depth so they could start excavating that tunnel, they had to excavate a deep shaft. And so in early 2020, Galdi started excavations to install the tunnel boring machine. And they excavated 40 meters just north of the Mängere wastewater treatment plant. And this is a view inside that shaft at the bottom there. Cool, next slide. And so the geology in this area is pretty straightforward. It's the uppermost sequence is the tuffs from Mängere Lagoon volcano. And then we move into the Pleistocene and Pliocene sediments of the Tauranga group and into the Kawa formation. Well, it's Kawa formation in terms of that's what the engineering geologists called it. We'll get into a bit more specifics later on as to why it may or may not be that. And at about 33 to 38 meters deep, we find a really fossil-rich layer within this Kawa formation. And this is what we are calling the Mängere shellbed. And that shellbed sits on top of an unconformity with the Miocene Waitemata group, which is interbedded sandstone and mudstones. And so early in 2020, when excavations first kind of got going, there was an engineering geologist there who, whilst all this material was coming out, noticed that some of these shells look pretty interesting. And so the media caught whiff of that, and they published this article in the news in May 2020. So what we'll do is we'll have a quick look at it. A lot of the information has been subsequently changed since then. So yeah.
I have to share a different window for a second, sorry. Share screen. Might not work, Nathan.
Oh, really? Okay. I can try it on mine.
I'll copy it into Chrome just to see if that's a part of it. Must be having troubles on my end. Did you want to try it, Nathan, or should we just skip the slide?
I might see if I can
okay.
share it on my end.
Okay.
Here we go. It's working.
Awesome.
Okay, and so you're going to get an ad to begin with, but it should be short.
It has every...
Hopefully it's going to work.
Patchy internet.
Such a tease. Oh gosh.
Maybe we come back to that. We'll continue on and see if we can get it going at the end or something.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Just before you do, if you want to drop that link into chat, and then I might be able to see if I can help on my end too.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Here you go.
Yeah. Cool. All right. If you guys carry on, and I'll work in the background.
Okay,
so, oops. Here you go, Nathan.
Okay, so yeah, and so what happened was initially the material wasn't going to get kept. However, this geologist that first noticed that these shells might be significant got in contact with Bruce Hayward, and through talks they decided to move some of the shell material to a siding about a couple, 100 meters, or a bit more maybe, down towards the south of the shaft, and so they dumped it all there, and there was about 2,500 meters cubed of this shell material, and there you go, it's a kilometer south of the shaft site, and it was dumped there, and so we don't have an idea of the original stratigraphy or any sedimentary structures. They all got lost during the excavation process, and this soil pile has now been relocated, and a lot of that material is going to be used as seabird roosting material in the Manukau Harbour, and I think possibly around Pukitutu Island too. And so so this is what the spoil pile looked like. It's about 60 meters long, about 10 meters high, and then about 4 meters wide. And probably about the other way around. Yeah, so maybe 4 meters high, 10 meters wide. And yeah, this is what it looked like to begin with. Just one big pile, I guess you could call it like a treasure pit. And so, and so we go to the next slide. So it was becoming apparent that this deposit was actually really significant. The Kaua Formation, if we can call it that, doesn't really outcrop within the Auckland region. The Kaua Formation type locality is located at Kaua Creek in the south of Port Waikato, but actual kawa formation outcrops within Auckland are extremely rare. Most of the deposit exists well below the subsurface. So to get this amount of material and have it so easily accessible was something that was in the, you know, we were realizing that was really significant. And this deposit represented the largest fossil discovery ever found in Auckland since 75 years ago, which was during the excavations of a well at the Tahu Brewery, which we'll talk about later on. And so it was really just to be able to study the shells in this deposit, or the material in this deposit, was really, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. We don't often get, you know, opportunities like this as paleontologists, have so much material and have it so easily accessible. And so initially we didn't know how long that material was going to be on this sighting. So Bruce organized the Auckland Geo Club to have a trip down there to find as much stuff as they could. I organized through the university's geology club a excavation day, and Watercare and the Gabba Aotearoa joint venture staff had digs, their family digs, where they brought along their family to go through and see what they can find. And so, but you know, when we were out there in these little day trips, we were uncovering so much new material and including new species. And we just thought, we can't let this go to waste. And so after discussions with Auckland Museum and discussions with Watercare, it was decided that Watercare would fund Auckland Museum to hire some technicians to collect and study and preserve this material so it's accessible to everybody. Cool, next slide. And so when we were starting this partnership between Auckland Museum and Watercare, we had two main aims in mind. The first was to make this fossil tonga accessible to the community. So this involved shell hunts, as I mentioned, with the family groups through Watercare and the GA JV. And also we did one with the Auckland Shell Club. Presentations and publicity is obviously another big part of this, and that's, I mean, obviously what we're doing today. We've done a couple of presentations for Auckland Museum as well. We want to make these fossils accessible through education. The museum has a dedicated education team, and a lot of the material that we have found is being used in the education department, especially some of the really giant oysters that we've found here. They're fantastic, and the kids really like those, and that they tell a really important story. Displays are an important part of this, and we've had a Maricardium spatsiosum on display during the Sea Monsters exhibition last year. And also the involvement of mana whenua was also really important, especially when it comes to things like the whale bones that we've found here and the stingray teeth. That's so that was also really important. And the second main aim that we had was we really wanted to contribute to the scientific understanding of Tamaki Makaurau Auckland during the Pliocene. The Pliocene in Auckland isn't particularly well studied. As I say, that's in part because the kawa formation is so inaccessible. And in order to fulfill this aim, we were going to create a project report, which is still yet to be finalized, a visit to GNS to look at their collections, the type collections. That also is going to happen soon, and collaboration with paleontologists, and that's people like Bruce and Alan and Fred, and naming new species. As Thomas will talk about later, we found I think it was 14 new species at least.
Yeah, 10 to 14ish. Yeah.
And so that's something that's really exciting and that we'll be involved with going forward. Cool. So the field work began in August last year, which it also kind of coincides with, I think, when we went into level 4 lockdown, or that may have been July last year.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the best time to start the project. But the field work ran between August and November last year. We would often be out there 3 days a week or less, depending on the weather. Initially, what we would start off by doing is kind of like a ground survey. If we were lucky and it had been raining and been blowing a lot, the shells would be on the surface and the sand would be kind of sunk below. So we could, when we'd get there in the morning, we'd all rush over to the pile and, you know, scurry over the surface to see what the rain had uncovered. But ultimately, once we'd done that, we had to dig, and so we used shovels and sieves. The problem is that, and you can kind of see it in this photo, in the background, you see it's nice and white there. That's what the surface looks like before you've dug, and then this brownish material is what it looks like when you dug into the soil. And so it's actually it holds the water really well. In fact, the Carl Formation is actually a really good aquifer. And so it gets really saturated, and it's actually really hard to see fossils in that. So we were finding that this process there was just so much material, and when we were digging, we weren't finding as much as we would if we were just looking over the surface. So it was becoming a very inefficient way of finding material. And so eventually, towards the end of the fieldwork program, the YLPA brought along their 20-ton loader and industrial screening machine to essentially just sort the entire pile out into fossils larger than 20 millimeters, and in the finer material as well. So we could separate the sand from the shells, and so that was a much more efficient way of screening material. It did, however, present a slight risk in that, and you'll see in a picture in a minute, that the fossils were spit out on a conveyor belt and dumped at a height. So some did break. However, most were pretty good. And when you think about it, that the shells, most of the shells, well, actually no, quite a few of the shells are in good condition. And when you think about it, you know, they've gone through diagenesis, they've been excavated, and then they've been moved and then dumped, and, you know, all these kind of things, and they're still there. They're still, you know, in reasonably good condition. So they've survived a lot, and yeah.
Yeah, I might jump in there for a second as well and say part of the reason we got so many good fossils through the screening machine is that the guys operating it from Waiopā were such good sports. They were super enthusiastic and always coming over with neat things they found. And anytime they saw a big Mauricardium cockle floating up the conveyor belt, they'd run over and grab it before it was dropped off a 4-meter drop. So, you know, big shout out to those guys.
Yeah, and they also made sure that there wasn't any large boulders or bits of concrete in the sieving machine, so that meant that we didn't have large rocks getting dumped onto the shells when they came out. And so, yeah, this is just kind of graphically illustrating the sampling process. You know, as you can see in the image on the left there, that grey material on the outside, you can see the little white specks there. And then when you start digging, it's just hard to see anything, and the sand sticks to the shells, so the sieving process wasn't particularly fruitful. The other way of doing it was digging or raking at the surface and kind of building up a scarp, and then it will eventually just collapse on itself, and then hopefully something would catch your eye and be worth saving. But it was hard work, and the two of us, it's just, yeah, it was a mountain too great to climb. And so, like I say, we managed to get this. We're very lucky to get this 20-ton loader and the industrial sieving machine to do all the hard work for us. The excavator dumps the unsorted material into the hopper at the back there, then goes through a conveyor belt, and then it goes through a 20mm mesh, and that sorts out, so anything that's smaller than that passes through and then gets dumped out to the right of that image there. That's the fine material. I would say probably 80 to 90% of the material was this fine sand. And then coming up towards us is this little pyramid of shells and rocks and all sorts of other goodies. And it was so exciting to see what was in that pile. Whenever they would turn off the excavator, we'd all run over to that pile and inspect, especially around the base. You can see there's lots of big, what looks like rocks there, but often there was whale bones around there. And I remember at one time, within a space of about 5 minutes, I'd found 3 large whale bones. This is a close-up of that coarser material. So you can see large bits of lithics and shells in there. Yeah, brings back many good memories. And with this more efficient screening process, we were able to uncover a lot more material. And so I guess the interest in the media began to grow even more, and it accumulated in, we had a media day at the site, which involved 4 different media outlets. We had Stuff, we had RNZ, we had TV3 and Te Karerai, all came to do stories on the excavations and a lot of the material that we were finding. So that was super exciting, also very daunting, because we have no media training. This was our first, we're thrown into the deep end with this. So, but it was super cool to share our experiences and our passion. So yeah, good fun.
So yeah, that wraps up the sort of experience we had on site, I guess. We worked up through till, I think it was late November, and then after that we were expecting the pile to be moved, but it actually did stay there over summer, which was lucky because it yielded a few more things to other people that made later visits. But anyway, at the moment I'll dive on into some of the paleontology. What fossils did we find? How many did we collect? And what were some of the exciting things that came out of it? So to overview a little bit, I think so far we've identified around 250 species. So as Nathan said, maybe between 10 to 15 of them are regarded as new species, although we will take these down with us to GNS and then have a chat with Alan and see what he thinks with all of them. It's been regarded as one of the most diverse Pliocene marine faunas found in New Zealand. We'll have to see, but it's certainly looking like there's a lot of material here, reflecting a lot of different environments. So it's definitely got a good story to tell. We collected over 3,000 individual specimens, I think. We kind of counted up near the end of our stay on the project. There's probably more than that if you include microfossils, but 3,000 at least. About half of those were kept as voucher specimens for the museum. So including types of the new species and representative collections of all the rests from different sizes, different taphonomies, all sorts of different things. The remainder of the material was given, like Nathan said, to education department at the museum, who have been working on programs using it. We made up a couple of secondary collections as well, which can go out to other institutions maybe, and to mana whenua to care for. Oh, actually, while we're here, I'll just overview some of the fossils we got here as well. So, I mean, most of these are bivalves, but bivalves did make up probably most of the fossils that were in the pile. Got a couple of shark's teeth here, which I'll talk about later. We have occasional heads of coral. Here's one of my favorites. It's the big Stephopoma worm shell, the silkworm snail, and a big whale vertebra here. That's actually one of the smaller ones, but this one's a bit more worn. So what fossils did we find? Well, we've got about 11 species of bryozoan identified by Dennis and Seaborn. We've got 15 species of arthropods so far. That includes, well, that's mainly ostracods, but it also includes crab chela and 3 species of barnacle. Got 2 echinoderms. They're your modern day sea urchin kenna and your, what are they called? Snapper biscuit, I think, the flat ones. We found 6 different types of vertebrate from the pile so far, which I'll go into in a minute. We found lots of rhodoliths, but we haven't ID'd these, we haven't been able to ID these beyond rhodolith. Bruce has found 31 species of foram, I believe. As I said before, we found a few heads of coral for 4 species, we think. 6 species of annelid tube worm, serpulid worms. But by far, most of the material we've been finding is mollusks at approximately 175 species. And that includes chitons. I think we found 1 or 2 different types of chitin. We haven't identified a species for them yet, but they are distinct to each other. A single species of scaphopod. And then I think about 90-ish gastropods and 80-ish bivalves. So I'll start with the bivalves. Yeah, like I was saying, 80 species approximately. The most dominant among these was tawara, where there were tens of thousands of these of all sizes, from a couple of millimeters in the fine sands up to sort of a more regular size of a few centimeters across for that species. And so I'd say a huge majority of the intact shells in the pile were actually tawara. Also very common with dog cockles. These things we eventually worked out were not 1 species, but 3. And while they're not quite as numerous as tawara, they do make up a lot of the pile, and they were the ones that sort of got taken in by people as they visited the site for shell hunts and things. They were the main things people would find. And then some of the other things we found as well includes a new species of tuatua. We've got a diverse matrid fauna, and then the poster child's giant heart cockles and oysters. And so here's a fish bin with the phone to scale, just to show the like number and size of these things that we were getting out of the pile. Definitely one of my favorites. So yeah, here's a quick overview of some of the maybe more common things we were finding. Lots of scallops, tawara, like I said, Eucrasitella, that was a neat one to find. There's one of the 3 species of dog cockle, Glossomerus papiensis. Malachardium spatuosum heart cockles, which are about 10 to 12 centimeters mostly. And then our giant Crassostrea oysters on the right there. Gastropods were not nearly as numerous as the bivalves, but by far the most abundant group we found at Mängere. The most common gastropod were the slipper snail Mauricrypta, which we found thousands of across different sizes once again. And collectively, these gastropods show a huge range of environment preference, from rocky shore and reefs to pelagic, like the violet snails that you get today, open coast, sheltered coasts, a little bit of estuarine influence, I think, but not too much. And what was really cool as well was we got terrestrial land snails in there. And so some of the highlights from that were a new species of Muricidae and Placostylinae. The giant limpets you get up at the Kermadex, we found one of those. Found some giant cat's eyes, not unlike the Sama turbo snails you get at Waiheke and throughout the older Waitemata sediments at Auckland. And so here's some of those here. I think I've mentioned most of these already. There's the giant cat's eye. So I think the biggest, Nathan, you found was about 6 centimeters across, something like that. Oh, one I didn't mention was the cone snail. So we found a couple of Conidae in the pile, which is neat because I think, I might be wrong, but I think it's the youngest fossil occurrence of Conidae at the moment. And then here's one of our little microfossils as well that we've been digging up. There's a huge variety of microgastropods. This is just one I had on hand, so I thought I'd chuck in, but yeah. So I'll go over the flax snails a bit more since the paper by Fred and Bruce has just come out. So we've got 2 new species that we can now name because the paper's out. So Maori Stylus pliocene, we found a single specimen of that on the left there, figure A, and Archaeostylus monacoensis, which is a new genus, new species, which Fred believes is an ancient sort of extinct lineage that we don't get in Aotearoa or anywhere else in the world today. These are the oldest flax snail specimens that have been found globally, to our knowledge, at 3.5 million years old approximately, which is many times older than the current flax snails, which have been found up to 100,000 years old maybe. And so obviously these were found amongst marine mollusks, so they've been washed into waterways and transported to sea in their lifetime. Some of the shells had encrusting organisms growing in them, so we know that they've been sitting on the seabed for some time. And apparently it's not that rare to find them in marine deposits. Here's a picture I found at iNaturalist from Sean Lee up at the Poor Knights, where he's got the modern day, one of the modern day species of flax snail sitting down in a reef there. You can see the urchin crawling over it. So I just thought that was a cool little extra. Okay, the encrusting fauna was quite rich at Mängere. A lot of the shells we got back were bored or encrusted in some way. Same with the cobbles and some of the whale bones that were showing up as well. So the encrusting organisms included things like barnacles, bryozoans, serpulids, boring sponges, boring bivalves, and the rhodoliths I mentioned earlier. And these are probably some of the best ecosystem interactions we have preserved from this deposit, since we don't have the original stratigraphy anymore, so we don't get things like trace fossil interactions or in situ fossils, so we have to rely on these to kind of tell a bit of the story. And so here again, here's some of the things we found from that group. So here's a cobble I split in half and managed to get it right down the burrow of a filletted bivalve, which I thought was really cool. Found lots of shells with the borings from sponges. Lots of things, especially the oysters, were encrusted by thick mats of bryozoa. Here's a whale bone on the right here is almost completely encrusted by serpulids, which goes to show that these things were probably sitting around on the seabed for a long time and getting tumbled around. So even though we don't have the original stratigraphy, it was probably not a single skeleton anyway. It was bits that had been caught up in currents and dispersed. Here's some of the barnacles down the bottom, and then a rhodolith as well. So moving on to vertebrates, start with the Chondrichthyans, the sharks and friends. So we found the most numerous ones we found were chimera teeth plates, like on the left. So the one on the left is actually probably the best one we had. A lot of the rest were just fragments and worn pieces, but haven't spoken to anybody who can ID these yet. So if anybody knows, I'd love to hear from you, but I'd imagine it would have to be something that ventures into shallow water, because everything else, all the mollusks, are suggesting it's a shallow water deposit. We found a lot of great white shark teeth, I think maybe a dozen or more in the end, which was really cool. And so there's a little bit of a running joke behind that as well, because when we started the project, the Watercare head for the Central Interceptor, Shane Kunis, is always telling us, like, all I want from this is a shark tooth. You better find me that shark tooth. And we were all sort of laughing about it, like, oh yeah, yeah, sure, we'll find the shark tooth for you. And we didn't really think we'd find that many. Sure, they would have been in there because you find them in a lot of fossil deposits, but didn't know what we'd get really. But yeah, we started finding these great white shark teeth, Carcharodon calcareus, sort of a couple of inches tall. Most of them still had good serrated edges and sharp tips and things as well, which compared to a lot of the other molluscan fossils, which were quite worn, this was quite fascinating and really cool to have. And oh yeah, so the biggest one as well, we compared the tooth of we compared our biggest great white tooth to some of the modern day specimens we have at the museum, and we reckon the individual was maybe 3.5 meters in length, so not too big, but still pretty cool to have. We found a few eagle ray tooth plates as well. Those things were really neat to find, and I think our friends down at Makaro Marae were pleased to see them as well, because the stingrays are quite significant to them. So I think it was really cool that we were able to show them this and help find this for them. And then a strange one I found, actually, it's just a one-off. I found a single rostral tooth from a saw shark, looking through some of the fine sediments one day. And this one, I think it's the species Icamawi sensifer, which is known for having barbs down both sides of the tooth. This one appears to be quite warm, but you can still see little nodules where the barbs would have been. So I'm fairly confident that's what it is, but who knows? And then cetaceans, the whales. So I don't think we were really expecting to find whales when we set out. The first one that was found was on the left, Kathy Campbell. She was on site one day before we started with the museum, as you know, on one of the family dig days, and she came up to us with this, and we were just like, "Wow, what is this?" Like, we were gobsmacked. And after that, we were always looking out for more. So I think for Nathan especially, that paid off. He probably found at least 2/3 of our whale haul by himself. There he is there with a fragment of jawbone, looking quite chuffed. But we also found, as well as vertebrae and jaw, we found some bulla, we found periodic bones, and sort of a mixture of other fragments that have been broken up and worn down a bit. And we haven't got any sort of species or genera from them, but Felix down at Te Papa has had a look at them, so had a look at the photos rather, I should say, and reckons they're all baleen whale bones. But the really cool one was on the right here. So Nathan found that one day, and I sort of looked at it and didn't really know what it was and kind of forgot about it. But then he showed Wilma at the museum, and she was like, "Guys, it's sperm whale tooth." So yeah, we've got this tooth here. It's missing the crown, but the root's pretty much intact. And where the crown's broken away, you can see the cross section here. It has all the characteristics you'd expect of a sperm whale tooth. It doesn't have any enamel coating or any trace of enamel coating, which would suggest it's the modern sperm whale, Phyceta macrocephalus. And if that's the case, then it's possibly one of the oldest verifiable records of that species from New Zealand. Our rarest finds, though, were Pliocene sauropod here on the left and prehistoric KFC on the right. And I know Daniel got in touch with us earlier, giving us a heads up to look out for any bird bones. And unfortunately, this is the only one we could find for you, Daniel, but we tried. Okay, so we're going to move on to part 3 now. What did we find from these fossils? What are they telling us about the age and the environment down at Mängere? So Nathan and I are going to sort of talk about this a little bit both. I'm going to lead off by talking about the Mängere site, and then Nathan's going to compare our site to some of the other similar aged places around Auckland. And so the picture here on the left is Shane finally getting a shark tooth that he always wanted. So the age of the shellbed was determined through molluscan biostratigraphy. There's in appearance, it looked very similar to the Kawa Creek section that's Nathan mentioned earlier. There was a lot of species that were similar to that, possibly because they might reflect similar environments, but I'll get into that in a minute. But there were specific shells in our set that have a first appearance record within the Waipipian stage, whereas the Kawa Creek was in the Opotian stage. So we think pretty confidently that we're in the Waipipian here at Mängere. And here's just some of the species we used to determine that. So we've got Eucrasitella and Phylopecten, both of which are extinct by the end of the Waipipian. And similarly, we've got Glycimerita minaiensis and Babetia novazelandae, both of which first appeared during the Waipipian, so it kind of brackets the age down a bit more. I think Bruce looked at the forams as well to try and determine a range, but it wasn't quite as refined as the mollusks. It was a bit broader, just as Pliocene. And then the environment we've inferred from these fossils is a current swept shallow subtidal channel with an inlet, perhaps. Partly this is because of the huge density of tawara and dog cockle in association within the deposit. They're known today in channels, current swept channels, sort of 5 to 30 meters deep in places like the Hauraki Gulf and I think near Whangarei Harbour. I know Powell published on them a bit back in the day, so that's a good indication of the environment we're looking at. But because we've got such a huge diversity of species from other environments as well, we reckon it had to be, within proximity at least to rocky shores, reefs, and both sheltered and open coasts. But ultimately, it represents a completely different environment to the modern day Manukau, which is very tidal. It's enclosed and protected from the open sea by the Awhitu dune barriers. And then as well as those, we've come across a couple of warm water indicator taxa, which I think I mentioned a few of them before, like the cone snails and the giant Kermadec limpets, which suggests that the surface temperatures were maybe a little warmer in the oceans of Auckland at the time. So we'll have to look more into that, but it's a start. So Nathan was going to talk about comparisons to the other sections now.
Cool, yeah. So the Kawa Creek section, this is located near the Kawa stream and it's a couple of kilometers south of Port Waikato. You can see just in the left of that image there, that's the type section there with the Ngātatura volcanics in the background. Thomas and I and several others from the Auckland Geo Club were quite lucky to go down there a couple of months ago. It was first published by Bartram, I think, back in 1918, and subsequent publications by Baden-Powell and Bartram in 1928, and in Laws as well. He published 3 articles on the gastropods and the bivalves. And the Kawa Formation is the molluscan fauna suggests that it's early Pliocene, so Apotean. That is ever so slightly older than the Mängere shellbed, and the fauna indicates a open coast environment, probably, or it's certainly more open than the Mängere deposit, and also the micromollusks, the forams suggest a deeper depositional environment as well. However, there was also rocky shores in amongst this as well, and that's based off of the oysters that we find in this deposit, and things like the Maori crypta as well. So in that regards, not too dissimilar from the Mängere deposit. And the other deposit that we used as a comparison is the Kawa Formation excavated during the construction of a well at the Otahu Brewery back in 1945. And this brewery is now DB Brewery. And these fossils were excavated around 30 meters below the surface, and they were hauled up in buckets, and the paleontologists of the day, Marwick, Laws, Finlay, Powell, they were all there in a similar way to how, we were all there present for the excavations for the Mängere deposit. And the macro fauna, or the macro mollusks from the Otahu Brewery well, were published by John Marwick in 1948. I think that was paleontological bulletin number 17, I think. And then Laws published on the micros in 1950. And that's the next paleontological bulletin, so probably 18. And Marwick, he defined the layer that these fossils were occurring in as the Otahu Formation. He noticed subtle lithostratigraphical differences between the Kawa Creek deposit and the Otahu Brewery well. The lithostratigraphy of the Mängere deposit is also more similar with the Otahu deposit than it is with the Kawa deposit. For simplicity, we're still calling it the Kawa Formation, and however, it might be worthwhile bringing the Otahu Formation back into existence, because it does appear that the the lithology of the deposit at Mängere and Otahu is quite separate from the Kawa deposit. And the interpretation of this deposit is a partially sheltered bay, quite shallow, 10 to 20 meters deep, with estuarine rocky shore and pelagic influence. So essentially what we're dealing with at the Mängere deposit. And that's an image of Dicinia Powie, and we get quite a few of those at Mängere as well, really giant Dicinia.
Yeah.
And this is just showing where, that's the Mängere shaft. The Otahu Brewery well is a couple of kilometers east of Mängere, and in the Kawa Creek deposit just south of Port Waikato. There's also around Weymouth, near the airport, there's also some casts of Pliocene mollusks there, probably Waipipian age. And I think there's also some deposits, very, very small deposits on the southeastern side of the Manukau Harbour. But as I say, virtually all of this deposit is located hundreds of meters below the surface in the Manukau lowlands. Cool, yeah, and so just kind of in summary, the Mängere deposit and the Otahu Brewery well deposit are both Waipipian. They're ever so slightly younger than the Kawa Creek deposit, where the molluscan fauna is giving us a slightly older, early Pliocene or Protean age. And the paleo environment at Mängere is certainly shallower than it is at Kawa, and maybe ever so slightly deeper than at Otahu.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, basically to kind of wrap up the talk a little bit, let's go over what sort of next for the project. What do we hope will come out of this, and what are we going to be doing in the next few months? So we still need to go through and sort out some of the other collections we made. I'm finished writing the report summarizing the findings that we've presented. Some of the specimens that we're sorting out and labeling and imaging, we're going to send off to Mana Whenua, give them back to them. And then we're also hoping to visit, I think we said earlier, we're hoping to visit Wellington to look at the collections in GNS and have a chat to Felix at Te Papa about the whales. And then finally, the work's ongoing with a host of other people to formally describe the new species that we're getting out here and do a sort of a proper summary of the findings, which we're working on that now, and hopefully it'll come out later in the year, early next year. So I'll sort of wrap it up there, I guess. I think that's all we had to talk about, if I remember right, Nathan, but I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can, and likewise with Nathan.